Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about some of my favorite races to play in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. These are not necessarily the best races in the game, but these are the races that I personally enjoy for a variety of reasons. At number 5, we have the Dark Elves. What I really like about the Dark Elves is how well they work within the current meta of the game. So, the current meta of the game is certainly focused on early aggression, because if you don't focus on early aggression, your enemies are going to swarm you, they're going to defeat you, they're going to end up with more strength than you because of all the cheats that they have. Well, certain races handle this much better, or in a more fun way than others, and I think the Dark Elves are one of those races because of their instant construction that they can get. They do tend to handle just the overall situation in a campaign significantly better than many other races. All of their heroes can be recruited at tier 2 or tier 3, so you look at Masters, increasing capacity, and being able to be recruited at tier 2, Sorceresses at tier 3, Death Hags at tier 3, and for most campaigns with the exception of Morathi Knight Assassins. Then you have a good selection of units early on in a campaign by default. So you have Dread Spears from every settlement, you have Dark Shards and Bleak Swords from every single barracks, tier 1 barracks, and then you get Dark Shards with shields at tier 2. But you also have Black Arcs, which also act as recruitment hubs in your campaign. Only Lokir and Malice Darkblade start with the Black Arc, but you can get the Black Arc relatively quickly in every single Dark Elven campaign. Just get the slave pens building in a Dark Elf campaign as quickly as possible. Get the slaves required for the right. It is a bit of a choke point in a campaign because you can only use a right every 25 turns, so that is a bit annoying with the Dark Elves. But you do end up having a great deal of flexibility in terms of recruitment, a great amount of hero recruitment, and you have really strong and varied armies early on. If there are problems with the Dark Elves, it comes down to their long-term potential, because these rights that they have that give them so much early game power, like Sacrifice of Cain, Sacrifice to Mathlin, all that, they have a very, very long cooldown. But early on, getting like 50% post-battle loot, 25% casualties post-battle, which affects the slaves, which you use for instant construction, and growth, so you get a growth commandment, or diktat, they do have access to. You can instantly construct buildings, and that is just genuinely a good system. It is a longer term issue, so I think they need some rebalancing in terms of like the actual pace of a campaign, because basically only using a right once or twice in a campaign when it matters is not especially great, but it does end up working given the current pacing of campaigns. So yeah, really like the Dark Elves. Could use some longer term, some better long-term, longer campaign benefits, but early on where the meat of a campaign is taking place, Dark Elves are fantastic. At number 4, we have the Greenskins, and beyond the awesomeness that is someone like Grimgor Ironhide or someone like Skarsnik in a campaign at the moment, like, yeah, both great characters at the moment, both really fun to play. Beyond that particular awesome aspect, you do have a race that just works phenomenally well given the pacing of a campaign, with actually a good amount of unit variety. Like, consider this. This is from a tier 2 settlement with a tier 1 barracks over here. And the units that I can recruit right here, you got a spear line infantry that's very solid. You have a solid enough regular infantry, sword and or axe and shield infantry. A really pathetic unit that's not really so great, but you can spam them very cheaply with goblins, squig herds for some kind of flankers, and then snarling pump wagons. And that's just really early on in a campaign. Later on, you have even greater diversity of units, heroes. Increasing capacity for shamans is not especially great right now, but you can at least get every single hero at tier 2, and you do have a whole bunch of benefits. And then you have a greater sense of variety of units. You can go goblins, you can go orc boys. Like, ever since Omens of Destruction reworked the Greenskins, I haven't really played with goblins as much as I've played with orcs, because orcs have become significantly more viable. And it's not just like the sheer amount of units that you can recruit in a campaign. It's a pretty solid situation over there. Like, the WoW mechanic could be improved. But here's the thing. You can also customize these units. Consider like the padded shields upgrade for orc boys with spears. Well, this upgrade makes these guys some of the best line holders that you can have early on in a campaign, minus things like, you know, Chaos Warriors, right? That Khorne can recruit, for instance. But for a very cheap tier 1 unit, this makes them great line holders in a campaign. Because obviously the effect will be lost when their leadership starts going down, but their leadership is pretty damn strong, all things considered, when you're looking at Greenskins. Sure, Orc Boys may not necessarily be worth it, but Orc Spear Boys, that is a completely different discussion. You have a great customization of units, different upgrades that make them very useful. Certain units don't hold up well in a longer campaign if you're looking to play the Greenskins, but that is where the scrap upgrades come in, because the way they change the scrap upgrade is now that you can have multiple benefits at the same time. So, for instance, you can get plus 40 armor for a unit of Orc Boar Biggins. 40 armor, that's 125 armor. That puts them on the same level as some of the best cavalry in the game. And there's all kinds of upgrades. See, Greenskins may not have the best units inherently, but they do have the ability of customizing their units in such a way that those units become even stronger in a campaign, be it the research tree or the scrap upgrades. So for instance, you can get like 10 armor for Orc infantry units as an example, or 15% unit mass for Orc Boar Boys and physical resistance, and then you have a bunch more benefits in terms of survivability, in terms of damage that you do have access to for various lords, lord effects, skill lines available for the Greenskins, and that gives them a great sense of variety. They might have problems against flying units, but they have a lot of tools even against, even in regards to that. So they are lacking in terms of flying units, but on land, Greenskins are phenomenal in terms of their variety, hero variety, so many different playstyles of armies available. Their economy just works especially well because it is based on looting, sacking settlements, which, yeah, it is how the game is played right now. And it ends up being a really fun campaign experience. If there is any weakness, I would say, with the Greenskins, it's their auto-resolve is certainly not representative of their actual strength in a campaign, but outside of that, yeah, Greenskins are phenomenal race. At number 3, we have the Empire, though of course when I'm considering the Empire, I'm only considering Gelt, Elspeth, and Karl Franz. Very unique campaigns with a good amount of power, campaign power for Karl, significant battle power for Elspeth, and a good mix of campaign and battle power for Gelt. So regardless of which of these 3 Imperial campaigns you're getting, you're gonna get a decent amount of variety, you're gonna get a decent amount of power, you're gonna get a significant amount of campaign flexibility. Funnily enough, I think Gelt is really good in that respect because of his mountain climate, really, and the sheer amount of mages that he does get. But the Empire has a really solid roster that can deal with a lot of different things. So you have solid enough infantry, good cavalry on land, good artillery, really good artillery, Hellstorm rocket batteries, Hell blasters, cannons, steam tanks, like just ridiculous level of power, mages, melee heroes, 2 types of melee heroes, Empire captains and warrior priests. Like, yeah, it kind of gets absurd, and a significant truckload of items that you can get with electric counts. Items if you're playing Karl Franz's campaign. So it ends up being a really varied, a very strong experience if you're playing any of the Imperial campaigns. I do think like Karl is in a much better state to have a really fun campaign. Like, I was playing a vanilla campaign as Karl Franz, and I won it by turn 52, or really 40. And I kind of wasted some time over here. But yeah, that was a really phenomenal campaign experience that I did have with Karl. Some tricky things, some lessons were learned over there, because like, yeah, I spent too many campaigns without really going on the deep end of certain elves. Let's just say Drycha was a freaking nightmare to deal with, but outside of that, yeah, it was really fun, really interesting campaign experience. The Empire has gone from being one of the worst races to play in the game to being genuinely one of the best and most interesting races to play. I would recommend owning Thrones of Decay, but you don't necessarily need to own any of the DLCs outside of that. And yeah, it's just a really, really good experience that the Empire does have, and Creative Assembly did a great deal of work with Thrones of Decay to elevate them from being one of the worst races to play in a campaign to being one of the best. And very thematic as well, like just good amount of variety of units, solid economy. There is certainly some bullshit over here with nobles, abusing nobles in a campaign, so that is a bit of a shame, but it works. It does work fairly well, and it does make for a fun and entertaining campaign experience. At number 2, we have the Dwarves. Ever since Thrones of Decay, the Dwarves have become a really phenomenal race to play, especially with Malachi, but every single Dwarven campaign has been elevated in a significant fashion. Beyond the Age of Reckoning mechanic, the Deeps mechanic that they also added, which makes your settlements work in a long-term perspective, like really buffing the economy of certain regions, in a longer campaign. But in the short term, you have the Age of Reckoning system, which does make for campaigns being far more dynamic. You add in Malachi's adventure for Malachi's own campaign, it does become really, really fun. And this is one of the best campaigns of the game, and one of the most played campaigns as well in the game at the moment. But then there's more to the Dwarves. What I really like about the Dwarves is that you actually have long-term objectives that are just beyond, complete whatever bullshit long campaign victory conditions you have. You actually have genuine objectives over here with the Legendary Grudges. Some of them are questionable, so to speak, or annoying to actually get, but others are very, very thematic, like, seal the tombs and deal with the vampires, or claim all of Norsca to deal with all of Norsca, or the best one, which is to restore the Underway network in the Old World Mountains and Grey Mountains over here through this Legendary Grudge, and that gives you a teleportation within that Underway network. Ends up being a really good campaign experience with Dwarves, and there's a reason I've spent over 10% of my entire Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires playtime playing as the Dwarves ever since Thrones of Decay came out. Malachi's ridiculous, Thorgrim's pretty solid, Grombrindle is just completely broken and absurd in his campaign. You do end up having a really great campaign experience, and you avoid some of the annoyances that you have with so many other races because you can guarantee confederations with all the other legendary lords within your own race. Ends up being really good, really thematic, very, very solid with them. And while you do lack cavalry, which is a bit of a downer, you do have really powerful units on ground and air. You have aerial dominance in game. Regular gyrocopters are quite powerful. Gyrocopters with brimstone guns, well, they're basically Iron Drakes, but flying. That is absurd. And gyro bombers, holy shit. Like, I don't care necessarily too much about thunder barges. I think people exaggerate that. But gyro bombers, whew, yeah, those things are crazy by default. Let's not even consider Malachi's level of bullshit with regards to war machines and all the unique upgrades that they have. But you also have a really good research tree over here that gives you a ton of significant benefits like construction guilds and especially Grand Throne Chamber. So yeah, Dwarves end up working very well in their campaigns, having a great variety, having a very dynamic sense to all of their campaigns. Belgar and Fork, not necessarily as good, but the other ones do work. They work pretty well, and I'm really glad that Creative Assembly has made all those changes to the Dwarves with Thrones of Decay. Could use a couple of updates to be sure. Like, you can always do better, but like if we never get another dwarf update, I think they're in a really, really good state at the moment. And it took so long. Like, let's not forget how many years, over half a decade, it took Creative Assembly to actually update the dwarves properly. Like, there were all kinds of minor updates and all that kind of stuff, especially when Fork was introduced in Warhammer 2, but like, those were crap. I'm gonna say, like, they weren't real racial updates. This is a real racial update, and if it's the only one we're gonna get, it's pretty damn good. Finally, and number 1 at the moment is Khorne. Ooh, what a change of a situation right there. But what I really like about Khorne is that Khorne doesn't have to play by the same rules as everyone else. See, Khorne doesn't care about having an economy. You know what the economy is? The skull economy, the real economy in the game. See, Warhammer 3 right now is certainly playing in from the perspective where gaining money in a campaign for regular settlement buildings is not as good as gaining it through brazing, sacking, looting settlements. And guess which race in the game does that very freaking well? Yep, it's the angriest race around, which is, of course, Khorne. It might start a bit slow at the beginning of a campaign, but oh boy, does it build up very, very quickly. And you do have a really solid selection of units. Not necessarily the Bloodletter units, but between Skull Reapers, Wrathmongers, Cast Warriors of Khorne, Chosen of Khorne, Cast Knights of Khorne, it is a really damn fun experience, and actually quite very powerful in different ways. Like, ooh, we can actually finally use Minotaurs of Khorne right now after the rework. Really, really fun. race to play in a campaign. Good research tree, good amount of options over here, especially in the pillars tree, not necessarily so much in the armaments tree. I mean, there's good stuff in the armaments tree, but yeah, the pillars tree is absurd. Like Way of Wrath, -1 construction time for all buildings, and getting 10 growth, getting 10 growth after winning a battle per region. That is really crazy, really good, really solid. Gets the job done very quickly. And funnily enough, beyond just the fact that Khorne works really well within the current meta of the game, and has a great selection of units to use, minus Bloodletters again, minus Bloodletters. But beyond that particular aspect, Khorne is actually really solid at, funnily enough, diplomacy, because you have a whole range of diplomatic options available in your campaign, including diplomatic vassalization that not many races have. So Khorne ends up being ridiculously good from the perspective of building a massive network of alliances and not feeling like you're pulling your teeth out to make it work, which is saying quite a lot about the limitations of diplomacy that even Karl Franz has. Like, it's ridiculous that Skarbrand is a master diplomat even compared to Karl Franz in the game. Yeah, it's saying quite a bit with regards to all of that. But there is more to all of this. See, you also then have to consider the cults of Khorne, which allow you to teleport around the campaign map with your main army. That is freaking phenomenal. And it does establish a very dynamic gameplay system where your legendary lord is constantly doing interesting things. Like, you can play other campaigns as many other races, and your legendary lord is just mashing away at, a portion of the front where, they're not really going to face a challenge, but the actual hard battles are being fought on other fronts. Well, you can now teleport your legendary lord to the interesting portion of the front and have them deal with some really great stuff. Arbol in particular takes this up to 11 because of the constant challenges of Khorne that he does have in his campaign. Skulltaker also has teleportation to lords in his campaign, which is pretty solid. Just there's other issues with Skulltaker's campaign. And Skarbrand, fairly solid campaign over there, especially considering the various factions that he can ally over here in his campaign. It just works. And I think, like, if Khorne had been like this since day one, I would have liked it far more. Like, I never liked Khorne pre Omens of Destruction, but I think, like, right now, Khorne just works exceptionally well on the campaign map, given the current meta. Whoever did the reworks for Khorne in particular, and Ogres, look, I would have possibly added Ogres on this list as well. I think they would have deserved an honorable mention. But whoever handled the reworks for Ogres and Khorne did a fantastic fucking job at understanding how the actual game is played by veteran players, and to make that campaign experience fun. I keep mentioning a comment in my videos from someone who made this point. I was playing an Arbol campaign, I finished it, and I didn't feel it. Because, like, in many campaigns, you can feel the grind, the campaign grind. You don't feel that necessarily in a Khorne campaign. It feels fun, it feels thematic, it feels appropriate. In a lot of ways, Khorne, in terms of campaign pacing, diversity, diplomacy options, economy, etc., is possibly the baseline of what other races should achieve, at least chaotic races. Like, yeah, Khorne is great right now, really fun, and hopefully that Creative Assembly doesn't forget the lessons that they learned with redesigning Khorne. Or Ogres. Also, what I think is really good about Khorne and Ogres is that they don't need a whole lot of territory to have a phenomenal experience. Like, I've talked about in many videos on this channel about how the best thing to do in your campaign is to push as aggressively as possible to conquer as much territory as possible, right? That is still the case in many campaigns. But Khorne, it's designed in such a way that's not necessary. And the downside of having to conquer a lot of territories, you end up with a bunch of useless crap, basically, on your hands that you have to develop. That's not especially fun. It works, it's good to do, but it does have drawbacks. And you don't want to sell it to factions that, you could theoretically confederate from diplomacy, because you're actually screwing yourself over from a confederation standpoint. That's one of the reasons Karl Franz has a great campaign, because he can sell that territory to other factions because he has guaranteed confederation. It's one of the benefits of Dwarves in their own campaign. And with Khorne, well, you just don't care, because it's like, economically, they're not going to add all that much. There's some resources that you could use, to be sure, But outside of like some resources, like, for instance, one of the things that you would actually want are exotic animals. And the reason you'd want exotic animals is because they can give you Minotaurs of Khorne and Slaughter Brutes at tier 3. That is freaking awesome. But outside of that specific circumstance, you don't really care too much about holding a lot of different territories. And since you have a lot of movement around the campaign map, teleportation around the campaign map, you can actually play an entire core campaign with a single freaking province. That is not something many races can do. So it's kind of hilarious to think about the idea that Creative Assembly has made playing tall in the way that playing tall is not playing passive. Playing tall properly, in the sense that you're taking a certain number of select territories and you're focusing on developing them, and as opposed to just spreading yourself across the entire world. Though, you also avoid the pitfall of just sitting in your own little corner of the world, because you will be traversing the world in every Khorne campaign. You will be going around the world. You will be going to deal with various challenges and then beat them up, take their skulls, and then maybe force them into an alliance for vassalization. The options are incredible. That's all I had to say. Cosine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and I'll see you next time. Let me know what you guys think about all of this.